Back in 2010, around the time Black Ops came out, I was beginning to get a little bored of Call of Duty. Modern Warfare was fantastic, World at War, yeah, it was pretty good. Modern Warfare 2, excellent again. But if we're being honest with ourselves, they're all similar games, and like a lot of people I'm sure, there came a point when I needed a break from the yearly set pieces and explosions. That break actually ended up lasting nearly a decade, and during that period, nary a thought about the series crossed my mind. It was Modern Warfare's 2019 reimagining that reignited my interest in the franchise, thanks to the copious amount of hours I spent playing the original trilogy. I barely showered or looked after myself at all for days at a time during the height of my obsession with Modern Warfare's multiplayer, and I also harboured surprisingly fond memories of the trilogy's single-player outings too. Is the story of Price, Gaz, Soap and the various other gruff characters the height of video game storytelling? Absolutely not, but combined with missions as memorable as All Giddied Up, No Russian or Black Tuesday, to name but a few, the campaigns were greater than the sum of their parts. My mood going into Modern Warfare 2019 then was one of tempered optimism. If it ended up being a bit pony, it wasn't the end of the world. I'd just go back to happily ignoring Call of Duty. If it ended up being decent, then great. Shockingly, it was the latter. The campaign wasn't all roses by any means, but when it was at its best, it was genuinely engaging. Perhaps the best example is Clean House, which, despite its relative simplicity, is one of the greatest Call of Duty levels I've ever played.
You know I do, but this operation failed, so why...
Take the front row.
Your dead brothers made sure of that.
We were supposed to have double the body...
Drop 'em.
Secure.
Alpha 3. Entry through the front door.
Given the game's success, a revamped Modern Warfare 2 seemed inevitable, and in 2022 it arrived. Reaching its end credits, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, it offered just about enough that I didn't feel cheated out of 60 quid. On the other, it featured some real dross, like violence and timing and its dreadful chase sequence. Despite this temporary setback though, I still had high hopes for Modern Warfare 3, especially with 2's post-credit scene teasing No Russian and the return of the series' most successful scoundrel, Vladimir Makarov. Even so, I decided not to buy it at launch and wait, as its 2023 release date, just 1 year after 2, gave me the willies, and boy am I glad I did. While I usually try to avoid discourse around a game I'm interested in until I've played it myself, it was always going to be impossible to swerve it entirely when it came to Modern Warfare 3, and what I heard wasn't great. But how bad can it honestly be, I said to myself. Surely it still has some redeeming qualities. Before I chat further about Modern Warfare 3, I want to confirm to you at this early stage that no, it really doesn't, and I'd also suggest switching this video off now if you don't want the campaign spoiled. I should also add that I generally try real hard to maintain a positive vibe on my channel, and so how unhappy I shall momentarily become hopefully helps emphasise just how disgruntled 3's campaign left me. Right, with that out the way, chew blooming chew, let's jump aboard the hate train. As mentioned, I already had a sneaking suspicion that Modern Warfare 3's campaign was somewhat dodgy by the time it recently arrived on Game Pass, but its first level actually flatters to deceive, to the extent I began to wonder whether all the negativity was but a storm in a teacup. Operation 627 starts out strong, with a team swimming out from a submarine and climbing the side of a fort-cum-prison, before you indulge in some of that night vision stealth gameplay goodness many have come to expect from the reimaginings.
Drop 'em. Bravo inbound.
You then rappel down the side of a panopticon as a riot erupts. An interesting enough set piece. Enjoy a twist as it turns out you are not playing as a good guy and are actually helping rescue Makarov, before the standard big budget finale kicks off as you blast your way to safety. It's well paced, intensifying at a steady rate right up to its conclusion. The Makarov bait and switch works well enough, and creeping into the grounds of the rain-slick slammer under cover of night is compelling. So far so good. Then, everything begins to fall apart astoundingly quickly. The next two levels, Precious Cargo and Reactor, are open combat missions, and they are the dictionary definition of incredibly bloody lazy. If you're familiar with Call of Duty's incredibly popular Warzone Battle Royale, then you'll recognise the core premise. You drop into segments of maps ripped directly from that mode, and are left to scavenge anything else you might need from crates strewn about the battlefield.
This is Kilo. We were ambushed. Dina is KIA.
It's Coney. They're everywhere, Commander.
The missiles. They're going for the missiles.
We can't let them do that, Vera.
I need weapons.
Look for containers with the Shadow insignia. They'll have what you need to fight Coney.
You were shipping more than just missiles.
Plenty more. Lucky for you.
To encourage repeat playthroughs, anything you find in those crates also magically becomes available upon restarting for whatever ridiculous reason. How thrilling. Unlike Warzone, however, these are of course single player affairs, and so there needs to be justification for your presence. Nigh on every time, that amounts to there being several of a certain object you need to find, which you run up to before pressing or holding the action button. Enemies are strewn around to slow your progress, and they sometimes patrol, but mostly they are just plonked down wherever developer Sledgehammer could be bothered to put them, and they lurch violently between being really stupid and really astute. When I say they're really stupid, I mean it too. Sprinting between objectives, barely firing a shot as the dribbling AI stands nearby gawping is a viable strategy, one which means many of the missions can be completed in a flash. Most, though, will want to play it the right way, at least to begin with. Unfortunately, you'll find that most of the time when taking it slow, the guards are very switched on, way too switched on, and because the UI is appalling, quelle surprise given it's also ripped from Warzone and thus not designed with a single player experience in mind, it's only through repetition that you learn how to circumvent them. It usually all plays out something like this. You're dropped into the map, choose which of the multiple objectives you're going to tackle first, and then begin making your way towards it. Soon enough, an audio cue and your minimap gaining a yellow glow will indicate you're about to be spotted, but due to it and the compass being about as useful as a chocolate teapot, you'll likely get caught and all hell will break loose. You can try to take out the enemy in question after they've spotted you, but before an alert is triggered, which works roughly 10% of the time, but another of their omniscient colleagues will normally spot you straight after anyway. Once everything has gone bonkers, it's often an exercise in futility continuing, as the speed at which you're surrounded is ridiculous, and so you restart the level. You drop in again, you pass whichever part previously gave you trouble thanks to the knowledge you've gained, and then get caught again ever so slightly further along your path. There are also barely any checkpoints, so expect to have to parachute back in every time you get yourself in a muddle. It is trial and error gameplay at its absolute worst. I would be less aggrieved if they at least contained some of what makes Call of Duty the series I'm mildly interested in, but there's naff all of that either. You never interact with any allies while roaming the bland, lifeless surroundings, and story beats are confined to radio messages.
Hostile destroyed.
Nice work. Whatever Coney's after stays on the ground. Be advised, Bravo 6. Coney has entered the reactor. You need to get down there.
Looks like Hilo is still overhead.
There are also none of the series' signature set pieces during these free-form escapades, which, if included at regular intervals, might have helped spice things up. In fairness, there is the occasional brief climactic confrontation like this one where you flee noxious gas filling a hangar, the mirror of how my wife treats me after a curry, but they're very much the microscopic cherry on top of a particularly putrid cake. There are 6 of these low-effort monstrosities nestled in amongst the 14 total missions Modern Warfare 3 offers, and that becomes especially egregious when you realise 2 of the 8 which aren't are about 5 minutes long. For all intents and purposes, open combat makes up half the entire game. It is incredibly disappointing, but towards the campaign's end there are glimmers of what might have been, with the last 2 being much less irritating than the 4 which precede them. Goradam is the more straightforward of this moderately less terrible twosome, and while all of my previous criticisms do still apply to some extent, its design is an improvement. For one thing, the map is smaller than most, which means the lack of checkpointing becomes less of an issue, as the time spent retracing your steps upon failure is greatly reduced. Packed within that space is a huge amount of verticality to take advantage of, and at ground level there are waterways you can use to navigate the environment relatively safely. Combined, they massively reduce the minutes spent haphazardly bumbling around at ground level and the number of unreasonable enemy alerts you'd otherwise have to suffer. Guards are also spaced out enough that it's possible to quickly dispatch individuals and even groups without alerting many more, something which is rarely possible elsewhere.
Watcher. Got Coney near a building to the southwest.
Locate those explosives and get them disarmed. Stay on comms for enemy activity.
Fried him.
Let's step it up, Ghost. They blow these charges, we're in trouble.
And in general, it's just less stressful than its siblings. High Rise is the standout, to the point, and I can't believe I'm saying this, that it's one of the best missions in the game. Starting at the bottom of a dilapidated apartment complex, you slowly work your way down its narrow corridors, peeking round corners, prowling upstairs, and sometimes even heading outside onto scaffolding as you edge your way ever closer to its roof. Out of all the open combat missions, its level design is the most linear, and this really works in its favour. Much of the time there is a single path to follow, and when you have a choice between multiple, they're all only short diversions which soon snake back together. Consequently, over the course of only 1 or 2 playthroughs, you're able to gain a good understanding of High Rise's layout, which really ups the enjoyment factor. Do Sledgehammer use the old yellow paint trick to highlight where to go every now and then? Indeed they do, but it's nowhere close to being the most egregious example of it in a video game I've seen. That simplicity also means the crates containing armaments and upgrades you can take into subsequent runs are far easier to find as well, so if open combat's trial and error nature is still a problem even here, it should be less so in the long run. I also love that after an unavoidable firefight once the stealth portion of High Rise is over, but before you reach the complex's roof for a big set piece with Captain Price, you get your hands on the Ascender. It can be used to negate large parts of the mission during repeat playthroughs, and it's a clever way to subtly create a checkpoint in a way which sort of makes sense in world. Speaking of the rooftop crescendo with Price, it's also High Rise's pacing and the way open combat is integrated into a traditional Call of Duty affair which makes all the difference. You start off sneaking around, then you go loud a few floors up for some pitched firefights which evoke memories of film series The Raid, then there is a final shootout on the roof to cap things off, the sort of extravagance you'd expect from the series' more conventional outings. Now granted, it's not the best ending ever, with the enemies using shields extraordinarily annoying, but it's more the mission structure I'm trying to highlight here, rather than its moment-to-moment gameplay.
Kill me. I won't help you. That's what they all say. Пошел ты нахуй. Пошли вы все нахуй, блядь. I can see his mouth moving from here. Shut him up.
High Rise is legitimately entertaining, a magnificent swan in a pond mostly filled with ugly ducklings, and if open combat is to be used in future Call of Duty titles, it should absolutely be used as the blueprint for them. As for the rest of the campaign, it's okay-ish. After the first 2 open combat borefests, Payload is basically open combat during its first half, as you sneak into an enemy base chock full of guards. Except it's arguably worse, as now you don't even have the vague hints their HUD provided. You're just shot at out of the blue with little indication of what's going on, and then have to choose whether to restart or go in guns blazing. Being able to switch to a drone for a bird's eye view is an interesting enough idea in principle, but it's not enough to even the odds, and the whole thing ends up being just as frustrating as the pair of missions which precede it. Payload's second half is fine if a tad by the numbers. It's little more than a series of shootouts alone and with series regular Farah Karim, but there's nothing particularly unique about it, and it comes at a time when the campaign desperately needed an injection of imagination. Deep Cover is frankly one of the most unnecessary levels I've played in any shooter. You walk through a base for a few minutes, you stand outside a building, and you follow a man who leaves. You then kill him and nick his keycard, enter said building, watch a cinematic, and finally run up a few flights of stairs.
Nick, where are you?
Quickly now. People are dying down there. Tyler, is Yuri with you?
Negative, we split up.
I hope he makes it.
Coming up the ladder.
Which watches the gas is getting higher.
If you asked me to conjure up in my mind a vision of what Call of Duty crossed with a walking simulator would look like, Deep Cover wouldn't be far off the mark. Immediately after comes another near gameplayless affair in the form of Passenger, Modern Warfare 3's take on the original Modern Warfare 2's infamous No Russian. It lacks any of its bite though. Say what you want about No Russian, and believe me, I have my issues with it. The inclusion of a brain-dead shootout at its end, my biggest personal bugbear. It at least made you think, it made you feel. It was unlike anything else. For better or worse, I don't think a developer could get away with it nowadays, if only because graphics are so realistic in the present, it would be utterly horrifying. And so Sledgehammer definitely had to go in a different direction by default. Having something similar unfold on board a plane isn't a bad idea in and of itself. As someone who soils themselves at the mere thought of getting on an aeroplane, the scenario left me deeply uncomfortable, but much of the rest of it is a letdown. During Passenger's 5 or so minute runtime, there is approximately 20 seconds of gameplay, and throughout you are an innocent bystander rather than a participant, which strips you of much of your agency and the scene of any shock value it may have otherwise had. You don't even have to engage at all if you don't want to. While testing out the level of interactivity, which is minimal to begin with, it became apparent that it's possible to complete Passenger while providing no input whatsoever. During the footage you're seeing on screen now, I'm sat comfortably, feet up with my controller on the table, while the game happily continues without me.
يلا.
Служба охраны! Брось оружие! Air Marshal! Drop your weapons!
No, please, there are more.
Rapido! Rapido! Heads down now! Sister! It's time! Come now! Holy Bora! Come in now! Don't shoot!
Everything which happens on the plane is also completely negated by the end of next mission crash site anyway, which renders the entire underwhelming affair completely and utterly worthless. Speaking of crash site, it's another open combat mission. I've already shared my thoughts about them, and I shan't dignify them with any more of my time. Flashpoint follows, and this one feels like an acknowledgement by Sledgehammer that Passenger wasn't No Russian enough, with many of its scenes of civilians fleeing a stadium in terror very similar to those that unfolded in Zakhaev International Airport many moons ago. That imagery is its biggest strength, with the rest of Flashpoint being quite unremarkable. In gameplay terms, it's a load of shooting galleries one after the other, which you'll have seen many times before, apart from this short section where you also have to pat Makarov to keep him walking. The mechanic is bizarre and does not affect gameplay in any way, shape or form, which makes me wonder why it was even included. Next up is Oligarch, another open combat snooze fest. Since Sledgehammer couldn't be asked to make an effort, neither can I, so I'll skip past it and High Rise after, which I've already spoken about, to Modern Warfare 3's 11th mission, Frozen Tundra. On balance, this is probably the campaign's best mission, although that isn't saying much. The underwater set piece with a single interaction is a disappointing start, but I really enjoyed battling soldiers and snipers in the snow using heat vision, or whatever else the scope is using to make enemies easier to spot.
Any snipers relocating?
Sniper down. We're clear.
Nice work, Captain.
Guys, regroup on me.
Roger.
Holding out on the ice near its end is engaging enough too. It's nothing spectacular, but it's good fun from start to finish, which sadly places it above most others featured. Following swiftly on is Gora Dam, another covered earlier, which is washed down by Danger Close, the obligatory AC-130 level, which is a more effective sleep aid than it is a video game thrill ride. Seriously, these are always extremely dull. What deviants are even asking for more of them? Trojan Horse rounds things out, and the fact the most interesting part of Modern Warfare 3's final level was getting a few glimpses of a well-realised London while nothing happens says it all really. I actually rode that merry-go-round on the South Bank once after a few pints a number of years back, make of that what you will.
Got light?
Smoking, Johnny?
Blend it in, LT.
You say so. Target's moving, Sergeants.
Stay with her, Soap. Just don't get too close.
On it.
Otherwise, it's a mundane outing that concludes the campaign with a whimper. Rewinding and fast-forwarding CCTV footage to track a suspect is novel, but all that follows is a series of bog-standard firefights in underground tunnels Sledgehammer couldn't be asked to make even look a tad realistic. You know, in shooters or action games, when it's very obviously signposted that there's about to be a shootout because the area ahead of you is inexplicably filled with waist-high boxes scattered around without rhyme or reason? Trojan Horse is a series of arenas which all look like that, housing escalating encounters of questionable difficulty. I never want to see another body armour wearing enemy in a Call of Duty title ever again. So far, I've spoken mostly about Modern Warfare 3's gameplay, and you may perhaps be wondering why I haven't talked about its story yet. I haven't talked about its story yet because it is rubbish. What I loved about the original Modern Warfare trilogy was the constant increase in stakes and spectacle. By the time the third game rolled around, you're racing through the New York harbour on a boat and fighting baddies in the stock exchange. Its story was global, it was all-encompassing, and while yes, it was absurdly bombastic, it's hard to deny it was also pretty entertaining. Where that trilogy continually broadened its scope right up until its end, the reimaginings have somehow managed the opposite, narrowing to the point proceedings have become utterly ridiculous. Task Force 141, Farah and the like are seemingly the military version of the Avengers or the Justice League, heavily armed superheroes who take whatever action they deem appropriate without their respective governments, or any government for that matter, giving a monkeys about what they're up to. They globetrot and shoot people in the face and apparently report to no one. The story is also essentially the same thing over and over again. Makarov attempts to do something evil, but he is foiled in the nick of time, which means by the time the campaign reaches its climax, nothing of consequence has happened past the Russian being rescued during Operation 627, the first level. Well, apart from Soap's death, which is wasted.
Take us to hell with you, Captain. Never bury your enemies alive.
Modern Warfare 3 ends so abruptly after it happens that there's no time to enjoy the stakes being raised, to appreciate something of note actually occurring after so much ado about nothing. I was repeatedly reminded of how stupid everything was by many of the smaller moments too. Makarov somehow strolling through an international airport without anyone noticing was my favourite of the bunch for a long while, right up until moments before the end credits. Soap is dead, Price, Gaz and Ghost are grieving, scattering his ashes during an intensely personal moment for the trio. Then the camera pans round, and Ghost is still wearing his little edgelord mask. I could honestly barely contain my laughter. In the end, that sums up my experience with Modern Warfare 3 quite nicely. I was hoping for an action-packed, well-designed ending to the trilogy, a rollercoaster which either concluded things with a bang or provided the perfect build-up to a fourth entry. What I got was a jumbled mix of occasionally engrossing linear missions and some of the laziest content I've ever encountered in a single-player shooter. All that mediocrity would have been enough to make me cry tears of frustration, if I wasn't already laughing at how terrible the game is. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and operatives. If you had a good time, do consider liking, subscribing and sharing your thoughts, and hopefully I'll catch you again soon.